Hello, this is John Burke. I'm doing the International Banking course for Waseda University. In my first lecture, I covered the global financial system as I see it. I talked about the infrastructure, this interstitial layer, and the superstructure. Today, I'm going to cover one specific institution, which is the IMF. Just for this quick review, the financial infrastructure upon which everything sits, and this would be your central banks, commercial banks, governments, and of course then we can get into what's international banking. You've got the primary institutions, the International Monetary Fund, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, and the Society for Worldwide International Financial Telecommunication, otherwise known as SWIFT. These are the critical institutions for the global financial infrastructure. Yeah, as I said, we can throw in the WTO and United Nations. Why? Because this entire architecture was put in place after World War II, as you probably know, at what was called the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire in 1944 and the San Francisco Conference for the UN in 1945. So the IMF, what is it? All right, it's not obvious what is this thing. So yes, it is an international organization. It has only nation states can be members of the IMF. It has a foundation document. They are called the Articles of Agreement. It does not have, except by fiat, a juridical structure. So it is not organized under the laws of any nation. The only structure it has is one that you might say is of a contractual nature, that by signing and ratifying the Articles of Agreement, a nation state becomes a member of the IMF. Of course, once you become a member of the IMF, you are obligated to follow the rules of the IMF, which are set forth in its Articles of Agreement. And of course, depending upon your economic size and status, you are required to make a contribution to the IMF. This is called a quota. That is the IMF. Now, the IMF, I'm saying the Articles of Agreement are not a treaty. Why do I say it's not a treaty? Because to identify a treaty, we must look at the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, which gives us the definition of a treaty. And of course, a key component to some document being a treaty is that it's subject to international interpretation and international norms. This is not the case of the IMF. It is above international law. And how do we know it is above international law? Because the Articles of Agreement say so. All right? So if we go to Article 29, you can see that the IMF interprets the Articles of Agreement. You don't go to some outside entity like the ICJ or something else to find out what do these articles mean. So it is a decision of the Board of Governors, which we'll see is the highest organizational body within the IMF, and whatever decisions they take may not actually concur with international norms. So this is why I'm saying it is not per se a treaty, although it is an international organization held together by the Articles of Agreement, which are ratified by individual nation states, and therefore its rules become obligatory upon the nation states that are members of the organization. So let's take a look at this, and you'll find this, it's not isolated to the IMF. This curious status of immunity from judicial process. So what does it mean? It means essentially that the entity is above the jurisdiction of the laws of any nation state. So this is in Article 9. So what does it say? The fund, property, so on and so forth. You can read the slide. It's not subject to any nation state's particular law. We would find similar language, and in fact stronger language, when we look at the Bank for International Settlement foundation documents. The quota. So this is where the IMF gets its money. Quotas. Not shares. So a share, we would use this term only when we speak about a corporate entity. But the IMF has status as a legal entity to enter into contractual relationships, to own property, to do this, to do that. But it is, as I said, it is immune, that it is beyond the reach of the authority of any nation state to control. So how are quotas shaped? Well, you can see the basic formula here. It's basically GDP, the economic size of the member, what they call your openness, economic variability, which refers to your balance of payments position, which we'll get into that later. And your international reserves or your financial strength. So here we can see percent of quotas and their voting power. Okay, U.S. is at the top, 16.5%. And you'll say to yourself, well, that doesn't sound like much, right? But it's a lot. Because it's more than 15%. And if we look further at the Articles of Agreement, if we want to make a foundational change to the Articles of Agreement, we need a vote of 85% of its members. So, in effect, the United States has veto power over anything it doesn't like. What we can also see in this chart, which stands out and is quite amazing, is the position of China. China is, no matter how you measure it, the second largest economy in the world. If we measure it by what is called purchasing power parity, and we'll get into that later, it's larger than the United States. But you can see that has 33% of the percent quota of the United States, and it has less than Japan, which is a much smaller economy. Look at India. There's another one. So what can we see here? This has been an ongoing disagreement since, we could say, the early 2000s, up until the present time, that these what are called emerging markets, not emerging anymore, they are merged already, they have come up already, they have emerged. They are dissatisfied with their representation in all of these particular institutions that I've talked about. And you can see why. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. So this is just to emphasize my point. GDP, purchasing power parity. China is 1. So why does it have 6% of IMF quota, and the United States has basically 17%? India has 2%. Russia has, I forget the exact number. Japan is, if we were to follow GDP as measured most accurately, which is PPP, then we'd have to completely redesign the quota system and the power structure within the IMF. And you can see my source is the CIA, so it's not that I'm, using some strange source to get this figure. So IMF governance, it's like it's almost like a corporate entity. So you have a board of governors. Of course, they're going to meet annually. So just like a joint stock company that would have a board, but then delegates day-to-day management to senior management, that's essentially what the IMF does. So we have a board of governors, one governor of each member state, plus an alternative. They meet annually, so you can see they're meeting annually, so they're not running the place. They delegate their powers to an executive board. There are 24 directors and a managing director. I state the name of the current manager. Generally, the manager is going to be appointed with the approval of the United States. This, just for your own information, is the organizational chart, which I am not going to go into. But this is important, and I would encourage you to read it. It's Article 1. Why do we have the IMF? What are its purposes? So this is one of the most important provisions of the IMF. So I'm not going to read Article 1 in its entirety, but Article 1 has survived because you had the original articles, and then you have the articles as amended. And it's the articles as amended which I'm talking about. But the Article 1 has survived the amendments. So the original purpose of the IMF is still valid. But Article 5 is also one of the most important provisions. Why? Because everyone has in their head this notion that the IMF is the lender of last resort, and it is accurate. A country basically goes broke or runs into serious financial trouble. They can request financial assistance from the IMF, and of course that assistance does not come free, either money-wise or policy-wise. But I just want to point out in Article 5 that the IMF doesn't lend. It may seem a little bit curious, and maybe it's a nuanced point, but you purchase assets from the IMF, and then under an agreement with the IMF, using one of its credit facilities, you have to pay back, you have to repurchase your own currency with hard currency. So what do you purchase? You're going to purchase basically one of the reserve currencies. It's most likely it'll be either dollars or euros. Or you can purchase SDRs, which is simply IMF money. You can't buy a hamburger with an SDR. You can't buy anything with an SDR. You can't buy petroleum, nothing. It is IMF money, special drawing rights. When the term of your credit matures, you have to repurchase your own currency, but with the currency that you borrowed. So if you borrowed in dollars, you pay back in dollars. If you borrowed in euros, you pay back in euros. If you borrowed in SDR, you pay back in SDRs. And of course, this is not free. It comes with an interest rate, it comes with fees, so it's expensive. It also comes with conditionality. So what is conditionality? This means that the IMF basically tells you how to fix your economic problems. So the government will usually propose conditions in its letter of intent that goes to the IMF when it is making a request for funding. And it has to propose modifications of fiscal policy, of monetary policy, restructuring of external debt, and so on. They are often referred to as austerity measures. So this is a difficult situation for a country, and in my next video, I'm going to talk about Sri Lanka, which is constantly going to the IMF for funding, and it's a good case study of how this IMF works. And in fact, if we look at the case study of Sri Lanka, we can, not without reason, come to a conclusion that the IMF does not work, because Sri Lanka, which gained its independence in 1948, is now on its 17th credit facility from the IMF. So if the IMF is such a successful entity, how can a country that has gone for funding or IMF assistance 17 times not have fundamentally corrected its problems? So in the next video, I'm going to use Sri Lanka, and I'm going to show you, because it is important, how is it conceivable that a country in a way becomes insolvent? You know, a nation state cannot become insolvent, but it can run out of money. What do I mean by that? It can run out of hard currency to pay for imports or to repay its external debts. So in a sense, it is broke, as you or I may be if we get into too much debt and we can't pay obligations as due. So I am going to leave it there. I will upload this video to my YouTube channel. I'm also going to post the Articles of Agreement of the IMF. I doubt if you're going to read them, but I do encourage you to at least read Article 1, the purposes, Article 5, which sets forth the operations with the fund, and the articles dealing with decision-making and with legal immunities. That's it for now. Thank you, and I will see you soon.